The sun was setting over the fields of Valshara for what might be the last time. An elder counselor Kurth knew it in her bones. The golden crop swayed in the evening breeze, each stalk heavy with the harvest that her people had worked so hard to grow. But none of that would matter in 3 days when the Traxian Dominion arrived to burn everything to Ashkyrith, stood on the central platform of the colony's main settlement. Her forearms folded across her chitinous chest as she watched the younglings play in the town square, their laughter echoing off the simple stone buildings that had stood for 200 cycles. They didn't understand what was coming, and she was grateful for that small mercy behind her. The council chamber doors opened and her fellow elders emerged, their antennae drooping with defeat and exhaustion that came from 3 days of constant communication attempts. "Any response?" Kurth asked, though she already knew the answer from their body language. Elder Velther, the oldest among them, clicked his mandibles in the negative gesture. "The Asari Confederacy sends their sympathies, but says they cannot spare ships due to treaty obligations with the Zenthi," he said, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 disappointments. "The Zenthi Collective claims we are too far from their space and they would not arrive in time," another elder added. The coalition council debated for 6 hours and voted that military intervention on our behalf is not strategically advisable. Kurth felt something inside her crack, but she kept her posture straight because the younglings were still watching, and leaders do not crumble in front of their people. "So we are alone, then," she said quietly. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, which in truth they were. The Traxian Dominion had given them the ultimatum 4 cycles ago: surrender and become slaves in their expanding empire, or refuse and be exterminated, as an example to other worlds that might think to resist. The Kelith people were farmers and scholars and artists, not warriors, and they had no weapons beyond the simple tools they used to till their fields and build their homes. They had sent out the distress call with desperate hope, broadcasting on every frequency they knew, begging the great civilizations of the galaxy to remember that mercy and justice were supposed to mean something. But the galaxy, it seemed, had no time for a small agricultural colony with nothing to offer in return for protection. "We should begin the evacuation to the underground shelters," Velther said with resignation. "At least some of the younglings might survive if we hide them deep enough." Kurth nodded, but her eyes were still on the sky, watching the first stars appear in the darkening heavens. Somewhere out there, the Traxian war fleet was coming. Hundreds of ships filled with soldiers who had crushed 12 civilizations and would think nothing of adding the Kelith to their list of conquests. 3 days, she whispered to herself. "We have 3 days to prepare our people for the end." That night, Kurth gathered the younglings in the teaching hall, as she had done countless times before. But tonight felt different because she knew it might be the last time she told them the old stories of the first Kelith who had come to Valshara, how they had planted the first seeds in the rich soil and built the first homes with their own hands. She told them about the values their ancestors had cherished: kindness and community, and the belief that all life was precious and worth protecting. The younglings listened with wide eyes, their small antennae twitching with curiosity, and Kurth had to fight back the sorrow that threatened to overwhelm her. After the stories ended and the younglings were taken to their sleeping chambers, Kurth returned to the communications center where the few technicians they had were still monitoring the silence from the stars. "Anything?" she asked without hope. The lead technician, a young male named Fixel, shook his head and then suddenly stopped, his antennae shooting straight up in surprise. "Wait," he said, his hands flying over the console. "I'm receiving something." Karth's heart skipped. "From who? The Coalition?" "No," Fixel said, confusion clear in his voice. "It's from a system I barely recognize in our databases." He pulled up the star charts and highlighted a small yellow star in a relatively unexplored region of space. It's from a planet called Earth. Kurth moved closer to read the message that was appearing on the screen. Translated by their computers from a language she had never encountered, the message was simple. Just a single word, but it was the most beautiful word she had ever seen. Coming? Earth? Velther said from behind her, having entered the communication center. I have heard of them, barely. They only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last 100 cycles, and have just a handful of small colonies. Why would they respond when the great powers of the galaxy have abandoned us? Thixa was pulling up what little information they had on humanity in their databases. They are a young species, relatively primitive compared to the Asari or Zenti. He read aloud, known for being curious and tenacious, but not particularly advanced militarily. Surely they cannot be thinking of fighting the Traxian Dominion. Karth stared at the message on the screen. That single word that represented either false hope or genuine courage from a species they barely knew existed. Send a response, she ordered. Tell them our exact location and the situation we face. Warn them that the Traxian fleet numbers in the hundreds and that this will likely be a suicide mission. Give them every reason to turn back. Thixel composed the message and sent it, and they waited in tense silence for a reply when it came 15 minutes later. Kurth felt tears forming in her compound eyes. The message read, We know the odds and we understand the danger. But we also know what it means to be alone and afraid. Earth does not abandon those who call for help. Hold on, Valshara, because humanity is coming and we're bringing everything we have. For the first time in days, Kurth allowed herself to feel something other than despair. It might still end in death and fire, but at least they would not die alone and forgotten that. At least someone in this vast and cold galaxy had heard their cry and decided that their lives mattered enough to risk. Everything she turned to address the council members who had gathered in the communication center. Inform the people, she said with newfound strength in her voice. Tell them that help is coming from Earth, and prepare to assist them however we can when they arrive. We may be farmers and scholars, but we can still fight for our home if someone is willing to fight beside us. As word spread through the colony, something remarkable happened. The Calith people, who had spent days in terrified preparation for annihilation, began to hope. They didn't know these humans or what they were capable of. But the simple fact that someone had answered their call when the entire galaxy had turned away ignited something primal and powerful in their hearts in the town square. The younglings asked their parents about Earth and who these humans were in the fields. Farmers continued their work with renewed purpose in the workshops. Artisans began crafting whatever might be useful to defenders who were coming from across the stars, and, in the sky above Velshara, the stars shone a little brighter, because somewhere among them, help was on its way. Karith stood on her platform and looked up at those stars. And for the first time since the Traxian ultimatum had arrived, she smiled. They had 3 days until the enemy arrived. But now they had something worth more than all the weapons in the galaxy. They had allies who cared enough to come. The emergency session of the United Nations Security Council had been going for 3 hours. And Admiral Sarah Chen was losing her patience with politicians who couldn't see past their own databases and risk assessments. With all due respect, she said, her voice cutting through another round of objections. I didn't come here to debate whether we can afford to help. I came here to tell you that we're going to help. And the only question is whether you'll support us or get out of our way. The Secretary General, a composed woman from the Mars Confederacy, leaned forward in her seat. Admiral Chun, nobody questions your conviction. But we need to be realistic about humanity's capabilities, she said. We've only had FDL technology for 80 years. Most of the galaxy still sees us as newcomers, who are barely worth noticing. The Draxian Dominion has conquered 12 civilizations and commands hundreds of warships. What exactly do you propose we do against such odds? Chun pulled up a holographic display that filled the center of the council chamber, showing ship designs and fleet compositions that made several council members gasp. For the past 40 years, while we've been trading and exploring and playing nice with the galactic community, we've also been building, she said. Every colony, every shipyard, every manufacturing facility has been contributing to a defense initiative that most of you didn't even know existed. She highlighted various ship classes in the display: carriers, destroyers, frigates, and several designs that looked brutal and industrial compared to the sleek vessels favored by other species. We've been studying every military engagement we could access, learning from every species we've encountered, and preparing for the day when humanity might need to defend itself or others. The representative from Europa Station, a gruff man named Kozlov, stood up. "You're talking about a secret military buildup?" He asked with disbelief. How was this kept hidden from the civilian government? It wasn't hidden, Chun replied calmly. It was classified under the Long-Term Defense Initiative that was approved by this very council 20 years ago. You all just assumed it was about building border patrol ships and defensive stations. Nobody asked what else we were doing with those shipyards. The Chinese Ambassador Liu, studied the holographic ships with a military officer's eye. These designs are unlike anything I've seen from other species, she observed. They look almost primitive in their brutality. Chun smiled grimly. That's because we designed them based on human history, she said. Other species evolved past their warrior cultures thousands of years ago, but humanity? We spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing each other. And we learned some very effective lessons along the way. These ships might not be pretty, but they'll get the job done. The Brazilian representative raised his hand. Even if we have these ships, do we have the personnel to crew them? He asked. Do we have pilots, soldiers, commanders who are trained for actual combat? Every human colony maintains a militia, Chun answered. Every spacer who works the belt knows how to handle themselves in dangerous situations. We've got veterans from the border conflicts, volunteers from the colonial defense forces, and private contractors who are willing to fight. More importantly, we've got something that the Tiraxians don't expect. We've got humans who remember what it means to stand up against bullies. The debate continued for another hour, with representatives raising concerns about resources, political fallout, and the risk of making humanity a target for the Traxian Dominion. But Chun had one more card to play, and she played it with precision. I've been monitoring the galactic response to the Callith distress call, she said quietly. Do you know what the Asari Confederacy said? They expressed sympathy. The Zenthi Collective said they were too far away. The Coalition Council debated and decided it wasn't strategically advisable to intervene. She let that sink in before continuing. Every single one of the so-called great civilizations looked at a peaceful species facing genocide and decided it wasn't worth the cost to save them. Is that the kind of galaxy we want to live in? Is that who we want to be? The chamber fell silent, and Chun pressed her advantage. When I was a kid growing up in New Shanghai, my grandfather told me about the old Earth Wars, about the times when evil people did terrible things, while good people stood by and did nothing. She said, he told me that humanity learned the hard way that silence in the face of injustice makes you complicit in that injustice. I joined the Space Command because I believed humanity could be better than our bloody history. But that doesn't mean forgetting the lessons we learned. One of those lessons is that you stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous, even when nobody else will. The vote was closer than Chun would have liked, But if past humanity would intervene on behalf of the Kellis people, and the fleet would mobilize immediately, within hours, the call went out across human space. And the response was overwhelming. The Earth Defense Fleet began moving ships into formation. Massive carriers that had been disguised as orbital construction platforms, suddenly revealing their true purpose. The Mars Confederacy, despite their earlier skepticism, pledged their fast attack squadrons. The Belt-Free stations offered their mining ships, refitted with weapons and armor-plating colonial. Militias from a dozen worlds volunteered their personnel and resources. Private corporations that operated freight haulers and industrial vessels offered to join the fleet, their crews ready to fight for a cause bigger than profit margins. Even the generation ship Exodus, which had been under construction in Earth orbit for the past 15 years, was pressed into service as a mobile command base and refugee carrier. Admiral Chun stood on the bridge of her flagship, the UNSC Indomitable, and watched the fleet assembling through the view screen. It was the largest gathering of human military force in history. And yet, she knew it still might not be enough against the Traxian Armada. Her first officer, Commander James Park, approached with a datapad. "Admiral, we're receiving communications from other species," he said. "The Asari ambassador wants to speak with you." Chun pulled up the communication, and the elegant Asari diplomat appeared on screen. "Admiral Chun, I wanted to personally express my admiration for humanity's courage," the ambassador said. "However, I feel obligated to warn you that our intelligence suggests the Traxian fleet at Valshara will number at least 300 warships. Your fleet, while impressive for a young species, is unlikely to prevail against such odds. Perhaps you should reconsider this course of action." Chun's expression didn't change. "Ambassador, with all due respect, we didn't ask for your permission or your approval," she replied. "The Caliph asked for help, and we're going to provide it. If that makes us foolish in your eyes, then I guess humanity is fine with being foolish." She cut the communication before the ambassador could respond, and Park suppressed a smile. "The Zenti Collective also sent a message," he said. "They've run probability calculations and estimate human casualties at 87%. They suggest we withdraw before it's too late. File it with the other unsolicited advice." Chun ordered, "What's the status of the advance scout?" "The UNSC Defiant is already en route to Valshara," Park reported. "Captain Webb reports he'll arrive in system within 18 hours. Well ahead of both our main fleet and the Traxian force." Chun nodded approvingly. "Good. The Caliph need to know they're not alone. And Webb is exactly the right person to hold the line until we arrive." As the Indomitable and the rest of the fleet prepared to jump to FTL, Chun recorded a message to be transmitted to Valshara. "People of the Caliph colony, this is Admiral Sarah Chun of the United Nations Space Command," she said. "We know you've been waiting and wondering if anyone would come. We know the great powers of the galaxy have turned their backs on you, but humanity has not forgotten what it means to be small and vulnerable and afraid. We're coming to Valshara with everything we have, and we're going to stand between you and those who would harm you. Hold on just a little longer, because Earth keeps its promises." The fleet jumped to FTL in waves, hundreds of ships leaving, Sol System on a mission that would either prove humanity's place among the stars or become a cautionary tale about overconfidence and idealism. But as Chun watched the stars stretch into lines of light, she felt no doubt this was what humanity was meant to do: stand up when others wouldn't, fight when others fled, and prove that courage and compassion were not weaknesses, but the greatest strengths any species could possess. In 3 days, the galaxy would learn what humans were truly capable of when they decided something was worth fighting for. War Hegemon Crix lounged in his command throne aboard the dreadnought, crushing victory. Amused by the reports his intelligence officers were presenting about the situation at Velshara. A single human destroyer? He rumbled, his scaled hide rippling with what passed for laughter among the Traxians. These humans have positioned one small ship between us and the Kelith colony. His chief intelligence officer, a scarred veteran named Vrak, nodded confirmation. The vessel is identified as the UNSC Defiant, a destroyer-class ship with minimal armament compared to our dreadnoughts, Vrak reported. Our analysis suggests it poses no significant threat to our fleet. Crix leaned forward, his talons tapping on the armrest of his throne. What do we know about these humans? He asked. They are relatively new to the galactic stage, having achieved faster-than-light capability only 80 of their years ago, Vrak explained, pulling up data on a holographic display. They have established several small colonies, but possess no significant military force according to Coalition records. They are considered curious and resilient, but technologically inferior to most established civilizations. Another officer spoke up, a tactical specialist named Thrun War Hegemon. There are unconfirmed reports that additional human ships may be en route to Velshara, he said cautiously. Should we be concerned about potential reinforcements? Crix made a dismissive gesture with his massive hand. Let them come, he declared. The Traxian Dominion has crushed 12 civilizations and brought them to heel. If these upstart humans wish to join the Kelith in oblivion, we shall accommodate them. In fact, this presents an excellent opportunity. He stood from his throne, his imposing figure casting shadows across the bridge. We will make an example of both the Kelith and their foolish human defenders, Crix announced. The galaxy will see what happens to those who defy the Dominion, and these humans will learn that their idealism is no match for our power. Increase speed. I want to arrive at Velshara ahead of schedule. Meanwhile, aboard the UNSC Defiant, Captain Marcus Webb stood on his bridge watching the peaceful world of Velshara rotating below his ship. His destroyer was small compared to the vessels favored by other species, designed for speed and versatility rather than raw firepower. But Webb had confidence in his ship and crew captain. We're receiving another transmission from the Kelith, his communications officer reported. Elder Councilor Kurth wishes to speak with you, Webb nodded. And the holographic image of the Kelith leader appeared before him. Captain Webb. We cannot thank you enough for your presence here, Kurth said, her antennae expressing gratitude in the Kelith manner. However, we must ask, are you certain about this course of action? Our sensors indicate the Traxian fleet will be here in less than 2 days, and they vastly outnumber your single ship. Webb gave her a reassuring smile. Elder Counselor, I won't lie to you and say this will be easy, he replied, but the Defiant and her crew didn't come all this way to turn around and run at the first sign of trouble. We're here to defend your world, and we're going to do exactly that until our reinforcements arrive. Kurth's expression showed both hope and fear. When will your reinforcements arrive? She asked. Admiral Chun's fleet is approximately 3 days out, Webb admitted, which means we need to hold the Traxians off for at least a day. Maybe longer depending on how quickly things develop. He could see the mathematics of despair calculating in Kurth's mind. But he pressed on. In the meantime, we need your help, Webb said. My tactical team needs detailed scans of your planet's geography, particularly any areas with deep underground structures, where civilians can shelter. We also need to establish defensive positions and prepare evacuation protocols over the next 18 hours. The Defiant and the Kelith worked together to prepare for the coming storm. Webb deployed sensor buoys throughout the system to give early warning of the Traxian arrival, and his crew worked with Kelith engineers to reinforce shelter locations. Human Marines went down to the surface to help organize evacuation procedures, and medical teams established triage stations. In the deepest underground facilities, the callous civilians watched these humans with fascination. Elation, and growing affection. They were shorter than most species the Caliph had encountered, and they moved with a determined energy that seemed almost frantic compared to the measured pace of Caliph life. But there was something in their eyes, a hardness mixed with compassion, that spoke of a species that had known conflict and chose kindness anyway. Webb found himself on the surface at one point, meeting with Kurth in person. The elder counselor had insisted on showing him the fields and settlements that her people had built over generations. "This is what we stand to lose," she said softly, gesturing to the golden crops swaying in the wind. 200 cycles of patient growth and careful stewardship, all to be destroyed because we have nothing of strategic value to offer the great powers of the galaxy. Webb looked out over the fields and thought of the farms on Earth, of the communities his own ancestors had built with their hands and sweat. "You're wrong about something," he said quietly. "You said you have nothing of value, but that's not true. You have lives, families, culture, history, and hope. That's more valuable than any strategic resource or trade route. That's why we're here." Kurt turned to look at him, her compound eyes reflecting the setting sun. "Why do you do this, Captain Webb?" she asked. "Why risk everything for strangers you've never met?" Webb was quiet for a moment, considering his answer carefully. "Because someone should," he finally said. "Because it's right. And because humanity spent too many years fighting each other to let anyone doubt that we understand the cost of standing by while innocent people suffer. We came from a planet where we learned the hard way that good people have to stand up to bullies, or the bullies win." Before Kurth could respond, Webb's communicator chirped urgently. "Captain, we're detecting warp signatures at the system edge," his tactical officer reported. "It's the Traxian fleet, and they're early." Webb's expression hardened instantly. "I need to get back to my ship," he said to Karth. "Make sure your people get to the shelters now." He sprinted back to the shuttle that had brought him down, and within minutes the Defiant was preparing for combat on the bridge. His crew worked with practiced efficiency, bringing weapons online and charging defensive systems. "How many ships?" Webb asked. His tactical officer's face was pale. 312 confirmed contacts, sir, she reported. Multiple dreadnought-class vessels, supported by cruisers, destroyers, and fighter carriers. They're broadcasting on all frequencies, demanding the Kella surrender and ordering us to stand down. Webb settled into his command chair, his hands gripping the armrests. "Open a channel to the Traxian fleet," he ordered. When the communication link opened, War Hegemon Crix's massive face filled the view screen. "Human vessel. You are in violation of Tavraxian territorial claims," Crix rumbled. "Withdraw immediately or be destroyed alongside the Calith vermin." Webb leaned forward, his voice calm and clear. "This is Captain Marcus Webb of the United Nations Space Command Destroyer Defiant," he said. "Valshara is under Earth's protection, and you will not harm these people while my ship still flies. Stand down and withdraw, or face the consequences." Crix laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "You face 300 warships with a single destroyer, and you dare make demands?" he said with contempt. "Your courage is impressive, human, but your intelligence is clearly lacking. I will give you one final chance. Abandon the Calith and flee, or share their fate." Webb glanced at his crew, seeing the determination in their faces, despite the fear that lurked behind their eyes. These men and women had volunteered for this mission, knowing the odds, and not one of them looked ready to back down. "Negative," Webb replied to Crix. "Reinforcements are inbound, and the Defiant will hold this position until they arrive." He cut the transmission and turned to his tactical officer. "Battle stations," he ordered. "Deploy all defensive countermeasures and prepare evasive maneuvers. Let's show these bastards what a human destroyer can do. Crick stared at the blank screen where the human captain's face had been moments before. Genuine surprise crossing his features. They refused to withdraw. He said with a mixture of admiration and contempt, "These humans are either the bravest or the most foolish species I have ever encountered." Vrack stepped forward. "What are your orders, War Hegemon?" Crick settled back into his throne. His decision made. Destroy the human ship. He commanded, "Use overwhelming force. I want the Keleth to watch their would-be saviors burn. I want any other humans who might be coming to see the cost of defying the Dominion. Show no mercy." The Traxian fleet advanced, and space itself seemed to darken as hundreds of warships moved into attack formation aboard the Defiant. Alarms blared as targeting locks from dozens of enemy vessels painted the small destroyer web. Sent one final transmission to Admiral Chun on a secure frequency. "There. Here," he reported calmly. "It's worse than we thought. 300+ warships, and they're not interested in negotiating. But we're not running, Admiral. We'll hold as long as we can. Make it count when you get here." Then he turned to his crew with a fierce grin. "Well, folks, looks like we're going to make history today," he said. "Let's give them hell." The Battle of Velshara was about to begin. The UNC Defiant danced through space like a leaf in a hurricane, and Captain Marcus Webb was grimly aware that every second his ship survived was a minor miracle. Evasive pattern Delta 7. He barked as another volley of plasma fire streaked past their hull. "Return. Fire on that cruiser to our port side." His weapons officer triggered the destroyer's railguns, and magnetic accelerators hurled solid metal slugs at relativistic speeds into the Traxian cruiser shields. The enemy vessel's barriers flared and held, but Webb wasn't trying to destroy them with direct fire. He was buying time and making them work. For every meter they gained, shields at 40%, his engineering officer called out, "Hull. Breaches on decks 3 and 5. Damage control teams responding." The Defiant had been fighting for 27 minutes against impossible odds, using every trick in the tactical manual and inventing new ones. When those ran out, Webb had led the Traxians on a chase through the asteroid belt at the system's edge, using the massive rocks as cover and creating choke points where the enemy's numerical advantage meant less. His crew had performed brilliantly, their coordination honed by countless training exercises that had never anticipated facing 300 warships at once. But brilliance and determination could only stretch so far against overwhelming firepower. "Captain, we've got multiple dreadnoughts moving to flank us," his tactical officer warned. "They're trying to box us in." Webb studied the tactical display, his mind racing through options that were rapidly disappearing. The Traxians had learned to respect a little destroyer after it had crippled 2 of their cruisers and destroyed a fighter squadron. And now they were committing serious resources to ending the Defiant's interference. "Take us deeper into the asteroid field," Webb ordered. "If they want us, they'll have to work for it." On the surface of Velshara, Elder Counselor Kurth watched the battle unfolding in orbit through the shelter's sensor feeds, and her heart broke with every hit. The human ship took. The Keleth had no military tradition and no real understanding of space combat, but even they could see that the Defiant was outmatched and fighting against mathematical certainty. "They're going to die for us," she whispered to Elder Velther beside her. "That small ship and all those brave souls are going to burn in our sky because they chose to stand between us and annihilation." Velther's antennae drooped with sorrow. "Perhaps that is what courage truly means," he replied quietly. "Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face certain death for others." Aboard War Hegemon Crix's flagship, the Draxian commander was no longer amused what should have been a quick extermination of an insignificant vessel had turned into an embarrassing display of human tenacity that was costing him ships and pilots. How is one destroyer still functioning? He roared at his tactical staff. We have 300 warships and they have one, yet you cannot destroy it? Rack studied the engagement. Data with a professional warrior's respect. For a worthy opponent, the human captain is using unconventional tactics. He explained he's exploiting our formation density and using the asteroid field terrain to minimize our numerical advantage. He's also demonstrating remarkable skill in predictive evasion. Crix slammed his fist on the armrest. I don't care about his skill, he snarled. Commit the reserve squadrons. I want that ship reduced to scrap metal within the next 10 minutes. The tactical situation for the Defiant went from desperate to catastrophic as fresh. Traxian warships entered the engagement. Shields down to 18%. Engineering reported, we've lost main propulsion on the port side, and the reactor is showing stress fractures. Webb knew the end was coming, but he wasn't ready to give up yet. All remain powered to forward shields, he commanded. Prepare the self-destruct sequence. If we're going down, we're taking as many of these bastards with us as we can. His crew worked with calm determination, despite the hull shaking from impacts and the lights flickering as power systems failed. These men and women had known the odds from the start, and they had chosen to be here anyways. Unley, his communications officer, looked up with wide eyes. Captain, I'm detecting massive warp signatures at the system edge, she reported, her voice trembling with either fear or hope. Multiple contacts. Hundreds of them. Webb felt his breath catch. Identity? The officer's face broke into a smile. It's Admiral Chine's fleet, sir. Earth has arrived, at the edge of the Velshara system. Space itself seemed to tear open as nearly 400 human warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a coordinated mass emergence that lit up every sensor in the system. Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the UNSC Indomitable, her flagship leading the largest military fleet humanity had ever assembled. The Armada spread out in attack formation, heavy carriers deploying fighter squadrons, battleships charging their main batteries, cruisers and destroyers moving into screening positions. The human fleet was unlike anything the galaxy had seen from humanity before. Gone was the image of tentative explorers in small research vessels. What the Traxians now faced was an armada built for war. The ships were angular and industrial, covered in armor plating and bristling, with weapons that ranged from advanced energy cannons to old-fashioned explosive ordnance. They looked like they had been constructed in the shipyards and factories of a Mayam species that understood conflict. Status of the Defiant? Chum demanded. Heavy damage, but still functional. Her tactical officer reported, Captain, Webb has engaged the enemy fleet and appears to have been holding them off. Chun's expression was grim with pride and determination. Open a channel on all frequencies, she ordered when the communication link went active. She spoke with the full authority of Earth behind her words. Traxian Dominion. This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the United Nations Space Command, she announced. You have attacked a defenseless colony and threatened an innocent people. You have fired upon human vessels operating in defense of our allies. Withdraw immediately, or Earth will show you why humanity spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of war. War Hegemon Crix stared at the sensor readouts showing the massive human fleet with genuine shock rippling through his mind. His intelligence had been catastrophically wrong about human military capabilities. How? He breathed. How did they hide this from us? Rack was already analyzing the fleet composition. War Hegemon. We are detecting approximately 390 human warships in various classes, he reported. Their formation suggests significant tactical coordination and military experience. Crix's shock transformed into fury. "It doesn't matter," he snarled. "We still outnumber them. And the Dominion does not retreat. All ships, engage the human fleet. Destroy them all." The two armadas crashed together like titanic waves, and the void of space erupted with violence. The Traxians fought with the confidence of a species that had crushed 12 civilizations, using precision energy weapons and coordinated battle tactics, refined over centuries of conquest. But the humans fought with something the Traxians hadn't encountered before: a desperate, creative, unconventional approach to warfare that seemed to ignore half the accepted rules of space. Combat human ships used ramming maneuvers, deliberately sacrificing damaged vessels to take out larger Traxian warships. They deployed tactical nuclear weapons, not as primary armaments but as area-denial tools, creating zones of radiation and debris that disrupted enemy formations. They unleashed kinetic bombardments, using pure mass accelerated to relativistic speeds, turning asteroids and even disabled ships into devastating projectiles, where other species relied on elegant energy-based weapons. Humans seemed to delight in using explosive ordnance, filling space with missiles and torpedoes that swarmed enemy vessels in overwhelming numbers. The Traxians quickly discovered that human point defense systems were mediocre compared to other species. But it didn't matter when humans simply launched 3 times as many missiles as anyone else would consider practical. And then there were the fighters. Most civilizations had abandoned piloted small craft centuries ago, considering them too risky and inefficient compared to automated drones. But humanity fielded squadrons of human-piloted fighters that flew with reckless courage and impossible precision. These small craft swarmed the Traxian capital ships, exploiting weaknesses in point defense coverage and targeting critical systems with surgical strikes. The human pilots seemed to actively seek out danger, flying maneuvers that no sane automated system would attempt. They fight like madmen, Vrak observed with a warrior's reluctant admiration. They take casualties that would break any rational military force. Yet they keep attacking. The tide of battle began to turn as human tactics started to overcome Traxian firepower. A damaged human carrier, the UNSC Valiant, lost main propulsion and began drifting toward a Traxian dreadnought instead of abandoning ship. The carrier's captain ordered all remaining crew to evacuate while he remained. At the helm, he aimed the massive vessel directly at the dreadnought and activated the reactor overload. The resulting explosion destroyed both ships and crippled 2 nearby Traxian cruisers. In the underground shelters of Velshara, the Keleth watched the battle with. The silence after battle was always strange, and Admiral Sarah Chun found it particularly unsettling as she walked through the damaged corridors of the UNSC. Indomitable, her flagship had taken heavy fire during the engagement, and repair crews were working around the clock to patch hull breaches and restore damaged systems, but they had survived. And more importantly, Velshara had survived. "Admiral, we have final casualty reports," Commander Park said quietly as he approached with a datapad. Chun took it with steady hands, though reading the numbers made her chest tighten with grief. 60 ships destroyed outright, another 42 damaged beyond immediate repair, and 22,847 personnel confirmed dead, with another 3,000 missing and presumed lost. Each number represented someone who had volunteered for this mission, someone who had believed that defending the Keleth was worth the ultimate sacrifice. "What's the status of the Defiant?" she asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. Park's expression confirmed her fears. "Captain Webb and his crew held the line for 33 minutes against the entire Traxian fleet," he said with quiet respect. "They took catastrophic damage, but managed to evacuate most of their crew to emergency pods before the ship broke apart. Captain Webb went down with his vessel, along with 17 crew members who stayed at critical stations to ensure the evacuation succeeded. Chung closed her eyes briefly, honoring the sacrifice of a man she had known as a dedicated officer and a good friend. Make sure his family knows he died a hero, she said softly. Make sure all their families know. The Indomitable established orbit over Velshara, and Chun prepared to meet with the Kelith leadership in person when her shuttle touched down in the main settlement's landing area. She was greeted by a sight that took her breath away. Thousands of Kelith had gathered, filling the streets and fields around the landing pad, and as Chen emerged from the shuttle, they did something unprecedented in their culture's history. They, Naut Elder Councilor Kurth, stood at the front of the assembly, and she too lowered herself to the ground in a gesture of profound gratitude and respect. Please, Chun said, deeply uncomfortable with the display. Please stand. We didn't come here to be worshipped. Kurth rose, her antennae trembling with emotion. Admiral Chun, you and your people saved us from annihilation, she said, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. You came when the entire galaxy had abandoned us. You fought and bled and died for people you had never met, asking nothing in return. How does one properly thank such courage? Chun looked at the Caliph people, seeing the relief and gratitude in their faces, and felt the weight of command settling even heavier on her shoulders. You honor our sacrifice by living, she replied, by continuing to build your culture and raise your children and tend your fields. That's what we fought for, the right of your people to exist in peace. That's thanks enough. Over the following days, human rescue teams worked alongside Calith civilians to begin the recovery process. Medical personnel treated the wounded, both human and Calith, while engineers helped repair damage to the colony's infrastructure from debris that had fallen during the battle. The Calith marveled at human efficiency and compassion, watching these warriors transform into caregivers and builders without hesitation. News of the Battle of Velshara spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. Carried by merchant vessels and communication relays, the response from other civilizations was a mixture of shock, admiration, and concern. The Asari Confederacy sent a formal delegation to Velshara, where Ambassador Sony met with Admiral Chun in person. Admiral, I must confess that the Confederacy grossly underestimated humanity's capabilities, Sony said with genuine humility. We also failed in our moral obligation to assist the Caliph when they called for help. On behalf of the Asari people, I offer our sincere apologies and a proposal for a formal defense treaty between our peoples. Chun studied the ambassador carefully. A defense treaty is welcome, she said, but it needs to include the Caliph and any other species who might face threats they can't handle alone. Earth isn't interested in exclusive alliances. We want a galaxy where everyone helps defend those who need it. The Zenti Collective sent their own envoys, military strategists who wanted to understand how humanity had developed such effective combat doctrines. When they met with human tactical officers, the Zenti were fascinated and disturbed by what they learned. Your species treats warfare as an art form, one Zenti general observed. You have studied conflict across your entire history and refined it into something almost beautiful in its brutality. Commander Park, who was representing the human military in these discussions, shook his head. We don't glorify war, he corrected. We understand it because we've suffered through too much of it, and we know that sometimes force is necessary to protect the innocent. But we'd much rather never fight another battle if we could avoid it. The political ramifications extended far beyond simple treaties and military exchanges. The Traxian Dominion, humiliated by their defeat, sued for peace and began withdrawing from several contested territories where Hegemon Crix himself was captured. 3 weeks after the battle, when a coalition fleet cornered his damaged flagship in a neutral system, he was tried for war crimes by the Galactic Coalition and sentenced to life imprisonment, though he maintained to the end that he had only underestimated humanity. Not their righteousness, but the victory at Valshara had come at a terrible price, and humanity mourned its losses on Earth in the plaza outside the United Nations headquarters. A memorial was erected listing the names of every person who had died in the battle. The monument was simple black stone, polished to a mirror finish, with the names etched in alphabetical order without regard to rank or position. At the dedication ceremony, Admiral Chun gave a speech that was broadcast across human space and translated into dozens of galactic languages. We stand here today to honor 22,847 men and women who gave their lives defending a world they had never seen, for people they had never met, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. These were not professional soldiers seeking glory. They were volunteers, militia members, corporate crews, and everyday citizens who heard a call for help and decided to answer it. She paused, looking at the sea of faces before her, human and alien alike. I've been asked repeatedly why humanity intervened at Valshara when the great powers of the galaxy had declined. Chun continued, the question itself reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of who we are as a species. We didn't come to Valshara to prove humanity's strength or to gain political advantage. We came because we remember what it's like to be alone, to be afraid, to wonder if anyone in the universe cares whether you live or die. We came because we decided long ago that we would be the people who answer the call, even when no one else will, even when it costs us dearly. That's not human exceptionalism. That's just being decent. The crowd was silent, absorbing her words. The people whose names are on this monument understood something that I hope we never forget. Chun said, they understood that a civilization is not measured by its technology or its military power or its economic output. It's measured by whether it stands up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. These men and women stood up, and the galaxy is better for their sacrifice on Valshara. The Keleth people were building their own memorial, a living one that would grow with time in the center of their main settlement. They planted a grove of earth trees that human botanists had brought as a gift among the saplings. They erected a simple marker made from the wreckage of the UNC Defiant, salvaged from orbit with great care. The inscription was written in both Keleth script and human languages, in memory of Captain Marcus Webb and the crew of the UNSC Defiant, who stood alone against impossible odds so that we might live, and in gratitude to all of Earth's children who answered our cry when the galaxy had gone silent. They thought no one would come, but Earth answered, and the galaxy would never be the same. Elder Counselor Kurth visited the memorial every day, bringing younglings to sit among the growing trees and teaching them about the humans who had saved their world. She told them about Captain Webb's courage, about Admiral Chun's determination, about the thousands of humans who had flown into battle knowing they might not return. Remember this always, she would tell the younglings. Remember that when darkness comes and evil seems overwhelming, there are still people in this universe who will stand against it. Remember that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Remember that we owe our very existence to a species that believed our lives were worth defending. The Battle of Valshara became a turning point in galactic politics and military doctrine. The Galactic Coalition reformed its intervention protocols, establishing a rapid response force dedicated to protecting vulnerable colonies. Multiple species began reviewing their own military capabilities, though none could quite replicate humanity's unique approach to warfare military as theorin.